There is a moment that arrives without ceremony. You close a door, the conversation ends, the obligation finishes, and in the space that opens, not a dramatic space, just an ordinary evening, just the small pocket of silence between one thing and the next, you feel something you were not expecting. Not loneliness, not emptiness, relief. That relief is worth examining, because the Stoics would say it is not relief from people. It is relief from a version of yourself you have been maintaining for them. Most of us do not notice how much of the day is spent in a particular kind of labor, not the labor of work or responsibility, but the quieter labor of calibration. Reading the room, modulating tone, deciding which thoughts are presentable and which ones require softening before they surface. This labor is so continuous, so embedded in ordinary social life, that it stops feeling like labor at all. It becomes the texture of the day. And it is only in the silence afterward, only when the calibration stops, that you feel the weight of it lifting and realize how long you have been carrying it. Seneca wrote from a life that knew this weight precisely. He was a man of courts and crowds, of senatorial chambers and imperial proximity, a man who understood from direct experience what it costs to exist continuously in the gaze of others. And late in his life, writing to his friend Lucilius, he described what he called the most important journey a person can undertake. Not a journey outward, a journey inward. Recede in te ipse, withdraw into yourself, not as defeat, not as withdrawal from obligation, but as the deliberate act of returning to the one place where your judgment has not been borrowed by anyone else. The first teaching is this: silence is not the absence of something. It is the presence of something that noise prevents you from hearing. Seneca was precise about what that something is. He called it the voice of your own reason, not instinct, not impulse, not the internalized preferences of the people around you, but the examined, settled judgment that only becomes audible when the performance stops. He observed that a person who is constantly in company, constantly performing and adjusting, never has the opportunity to hear that voice at full strength. And a person who cannot hear their own reason clearly cannot know whether the choices they are making are actually theirs. This is not mysticism. It is a practical diagnosis. The Stoics were not romantics about solitude. They did not believe that isolation itself was wise, or that withdrawal from community was virtue. What they believed was that a self which has never been quiet with itself is a self that does not yet know what it is made of, and therefore cannot be trusted to act from genuine conviction rather than borrowed habit. The second teaching comes from Musonius Rufus, the Roman Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus and whose clarity on matters of character was considered, even among the Stoics, unusually rigorous. Musonius taught that a person who has spent years living primarily in response to the expectations of others faces a specific philosophical problem. They have accumulated preferences, habits, and reactions that did not originate in themselves. These borrowed patterns feel native. They present themselves as character. But they are, in fact, the sediment of other people's approval. And the work of solitude, Musonius believed, is the patient work of learning to distinguish what you actually value from what you have been conditioned to perform. He taught his students not to fear this process, but to begin it gently, not through dramatic self-interrogation, through small, quiet acts of honest noticing. When you are alone, when no one is watching, when no verdict is coming, what do you do? What do you choose? Where do your thoughts settle when they are not being curated for an audience? The answers to these questions, Musonius held, are more revealing than anything you could say about yourself in public. The third teaching arrives through Marcus Aurelius, not through the grand documents of his reign, but through the private notes he wrote to himself. Notes he never intended anyone to read, notes that survived by accident and became one of the most searched philosophical documents in human history. What is striking about those notes is not their imperial scale, it is their smallness, their dailiness. Marcus was not writing about civilizations, he was writing about mornings, about the moment before the day began, when he sat with the question of whether what he was about to do was what virtue actually required. He used a practice that the Stoics called the evening examination, a brief, honest weighing of the day, not against what others had thought of it, but against an interior standard. What did I do today because reason approved it? What did I do today because habit carried me? Or because the room expected it? Or because resistance felt costly? The scale was not held by anyone outside him. It was held by his own examined judgment. And it was in the silence of that examination, in the space before sleep, in the ordinary quiet of the private hour, that the day was actually accounted for. This is the Stoic weighing scale that Seneca also described. Impulse on one side, virtue on the other. Not a dramatic tribunal, a quiet, daily practice of asking whether the self that acted today was the self you have chosen to be, or the self that circumstance assembled. The fourth teaching is the one most likely to be resisted, because it requires a form of patience that the modern world does not reward. The willingness to spend time in silence without immediately filling it. There is a specific discomfort that arises in the first moments of genuine quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of distraction, but the real quiet in which the mind has nothing to process but itself. The Stoics were well acquainted with this discomfort. Seneca described it precisely. The person who has been running from their own company will find, when they finally stop, that the interior they return to is at first unsettling, unfinished, strangely loud with things that were never examined. He did not call this a sign that something was wrong. He called it a sign that something necessary was beginning. The discomfort of genuine solitude is not evidence that you should return to noise. It is evidence that you have been absent from yourself long enough for the return to feel foreign. And the Stoic counsel is not to push through that discomfort violently, not to force self-knowledge through intensity, but to sit with it patiently, the way you sit with any unfamiliar thing, until it becomes legible. A person who cannot tolerate their own company for an hour has not yet made peace with themselves. And a person who has not made peace with themselves will always need the presence of others, not for warmth, not for genuine connection, but for the management of an interior they have not yet agreed to inhabit. The fifth teaching is the final one, and it is the quietest. Solitude does not rebuild you by telling you who you are. It rebuilds you by removing everything that was telling you who you were supposed to be. The Stoics understood that identity, genuine identity, not the social performance of identity, is not constructed through effort. It is uncovered through stillness. It was there before the years of calibration began. It is there underneath the accumulated adjustments. And when you stop adjusting, stop performing, stop monitoring the temperature of every room you enter, when you sit quietly enough and long enough, it is still there, waiting without impatience, as it has always waited. Marcus wrote to himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." This is familiar. It is often quoted. But in context, what he was pointing toward was not an act of force. He was pointing toward an act of return. The mind that has been handed to external events, to the approval of others, to the shape of their reactions, to the warmth or coolness of the room, must be brought back. Not seized back, not dragged back in a moment of crisis, but walked back day by day through the small faithful practice of being alone with yourself until aloneness stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like ground. That ground is what the Stoics meant when they spoke of the inner citadel. Not a fortress against the world, a place inside yourself that the world cannot reorganize. Not because you have walled it off, but because you have finally, in the quiet, learned what it is made of. And once you know what it is made of, you can move through any crowd, hold any conversation, face any disapproval, and remain, underneath all of it, intact. If this moved you, comment the Citadel holds below. It is our sign that you carry the philosophy with you. Subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.